Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you with us for what promises to be a dynamic and insightful roundtable discussion on the future of food manufacturing. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Didi Caldwell, CEO of Global Location Strategies. I've spent more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades, helping companies make complex location decisions around the world. At GLS, we specialize in corporate site selection, working closely with manufacturing leaders and economic development organizations to match business needs with the right communities, infrastructure, and talent. We recently released our 2025 Best Places for Food Manufacturing report, and today we're bringing that data to life with a panel of seasoned experts, which I will introduce you to in just a few minutes, from corporate leadership and construction to economic development. Before we jump in, a few quick housekeeping notes. We absolutely welcome your participation. If you have questions during today's session, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. We've also received some great questions, and a lot of them, during registration, so I'll be weaving your questions into the discussion throughout our time together. All right, let's get started. So I would like to start out by giving you a brief presentation of the results of our food report and a little bit more about what's happening in the trends today. So if we have a look at what's going on in food manufacturing investment from really going back 10 years, from 2015 until the first 2.5 quarters or so of 2025, what we can see is that food projects have been pretty steady. We reached a peak around 2021, 2022, 2024 was also strong. In 2025, if this trend holds true, then we're going to see about a 25% decline in project announcements. So we don't know what's going to happen through the end of the quarter, but that is definitely the trend that we're on. If we look at specific, what's happened besides just projects, but including CapEx and jobs created, we can see that the projects has gone down this year, as I mentioned. Jobs reached a zenith around 2021 with 21,359 jobs being created in that year. And CapEx reached a peak also in that same year at 14,545,000. It's important to note that over this time period, an average food project has created about $80.6 million in investment and on average 131 jobs. Just to give you an idea of how that's changed over time, we were at 55 million average in 2015, and now with a very small sample set in 2025, we're at 114 million. So that is not adjusted for inflation, so that includes the inflation on that, but you can see how that CapEx has definitely grown. If we take a look at what sectors have done well in food manufacturing, you can see that fruits and vegetables and specialty foods has been the strongest, followed by animal food, bakeries and tortillas, dairy products, animal slaughtering, and then snack food, which is going to be really important when we get to our panelists. If you look at animal slaughtering and processing, it is down almost 90% in total projects since 2015, so that has definitely declined. Dairy, on the other hand, is up significantly, and snack foods were really big in 2020, 2021, 23, but they've been pretty consistent. One of the things that you see here is food services, and that really shot up in 2021. So in that case, you think about something like ready-made meals that you order from Factor, HelloFresh, or what have you. That has, those projects really shot up in 2021, but they've calmed down since then. So now what I'd like to do is actually get into the details of the report. You can see the QR code here that is, you can download if you haven't done it already. You probably have, and that's why you are on this webinar, but just in case. And you can also go to our website under the report section. This is the second year of our report, and I really want to make it clear that this is a ranking based on a typical project profile. And the rankings are going to change somewhat for every project. This particular project is slightly labor intensive because it's creating one job for about $667,000 invested. And I usually use that threshold of $1 million per job created as the threshold between capital intensive and labor intensive. So this is slightly more labor intensive. We've assumed that they need 250,000 square feet on 30 acres, $100 million investment, 150 employees. Revenue is $250 million a year with a 7% earnings before taxes. And then you can see the utility demands there. So 5 megawatts of load at a 70% load factor. It's a sizable load, but not extreme. 25 MCF per hour of natural gas, and then 200,000 gallons of water and 150,000 gallons of wastewater every day. And this is the basis upon which we do the quality scoring and also the cost analysis. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the next few slides. So just like in a corporate project, what we have done here is, these are not site specific because obviously we're looking at metro areas. We looked at all 387 metros across the United States. And we said, based on our experience in the corporate world, what are the non-site specific criteria that are important to our clients? And you can see here, it's probably not a surprise that workforce is really important, which also includes education, demographics, attraction and quality of life is how well you can attract and retain people to that location. But then there's also things that are very specific to manufacturing and specifically to food manufacturing, like the regulatory environment, the logistics infrastructure, and the industry ecosystem. So this was the model for, and each one of these is made up of sub-criteria and tertiary criteria so that we can deliver a score for each metro. But as we know, it's not just about what the quality is, it's also about how expensive a location is. And so here you see the makeup of cost, and this is based on an average for all the locations, that labor costs make up almost 2/3 of the, or I'm sorry, 3/5 of the location dependent operating costs. Utilities are about 20%, and then the rest is lease costs and taxes. Now, you might say, what about logistics? It's really important to note that this analysis does not take into account logistics cost. We do look at things like logistics infrastructure, but we don't have origin destination pairs or commodities to be able to estimate logistics. So obviously that can move the needle considerably. So if you think about this, and I encourage people when you're thinking about a project and you're saying, how important are each one of these cost factors to my decision? And when you think about that, $1 per hour of wages accounts to $312,000 annually. $1 per square foot lease is $250,000. So those are two things that are really going to move the needle. Electricity is the third thing there. 1 cent per kilowatt hour is about just over 200,000. And then natural gas, water, and wastewater are probably, they are definitely material, but they're not likely to move the needle so much. So once we have the cost and the quality assessed for all of these locations, we plot them on a 2x2. And I know this looks really noisy, but what you need to think about is that each one of these quadrants represents a different classification of sites. So up here in the top right quadrant, those are the preferred locations. So those are high quality locations that also have a low cost. So notice that the x-axis, or the y-axis, I'm sorry, goes from 30 million at the bottom, which is the highest cost, to 10 million at the top. So I kind of like to think of this as heaven up here, and this is the preferred location. The opposite corner, which is your unfavorable locations, or if you want to go with my metaphor here, it's hell. It's high operating cost and a lower quality score. So these are the places that you want to avoid for this specific project. And then the other two regions are either high cost and high quality, and those are premium locations, or low operating costs and a lower quality score. So we call those premium and budget. And for any project, these things could move around. I know I keep saying that, but I really want to emphasize that this is based on a specific need. But also there are things that sometimes we might retain some budget locations and some premium locations. And through our due diligence and negotiations, we see if we can migrate those options into the preferred category. So when I put those on a map, this is what that looks like. And this is based on the national rankings. So when we get into the regional rankings, you'll see that the colors of the dots change because we're doing it based on how they perform in that region, and that's really important. So here you can see, I don't think it's surprising that we see some high cost locations where labor and electricity in particular are quite high. Also, remember that lease rates were a big determinant in that. So because logistics is so important and that food projects are often regional in nature, I wanted to take just a second to break it down into the different regions. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. All of this information is in our report, and we've also released videos on each region. So the East, North, Central, so the top performing here is Green Bay, Wisconsin. And you can see that there's a few projects that have announced, Kikkoman being the biggest one, $560 million and 83 jobs in 2024. But you also have things like hydroponic greenhouses. So this is one of the things that we've seen in the fruits and vegetables sector that has supported investment in that particular sector. Next is the East South Central, with the top performing location being Huntsville, Alabama. It was prior to this, I was only looking from 2023 to 2025 when I called out these, but one of my favorite announcements in Alabama is the Smucker's Crustables food production location that I believe is just outside of Birmingham. And that was $1 billion investment. But you've got premium custom foods. So obviously there's niche operations that cater to a specific customer requirement. And then here we also see some more greenhouse operations. In the Northeast, the top performing is Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, Pennsylvania / New Jersey. One of the things to note about the Northeast is that it's ranked number 2 nationally in the educational readiness pipeline, which includes things like educational attainment, K-12 pupil-teacher ratio, and K-12 spending per pupil, talent pipeline, which is measured by certificates, 4-year awards, and postgraduate awards, things like that. So there is a lot of skills in this region. In the Northwest, we've got Boise City, Idaho, which is both the top performing and the highest quality. And then the lowest cost is Pocatello, Idaho. Here, I think this is really interesting. This is Bell Unibel, that is the makers of Laughing Cow and Baby Bell cheese. And they have a Go-Go Squeeze announcement that went to Nampa, Idaho for $130 million investment. Fruit snacks, and then also yogurt. So Chobani is back. I don't know if you remember back before the pandemic, Chobani had a big growth spurt, and we're seeing some of that again. That was just a recent announcement. In the Southwest, the highest performing is Ogden, Utah, the highest quality being Phoenix, and the lowest cost Las Cruces. Goldfish are apparently still really popular. My children have kind of outgrown them now, but we definitely paid for a lot of goldfish production when they were younger. Bakeries and tortillas is one of those sectors that has also seen pretty strong growth and pretty consistent activity. And then an egg farm. So you've got all kinds of things. And you'll notice that some of these are rural and some of these are more urban or ex-urban. There's really something in it for everyone. The West North Central top performing was Kansas City. We've got everything from fruits and vegetables and specialty foods to grains and oilseed, dairy products, and frozen potatoes. I think Irving also had a frozen potatoes announcement in North Dakota as well. In the West South Central, Oklahoma City is the top performing, kind of like their basketball team, with the highest quality being Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, and the lowest cost Monroe, Louisiana. Walmart, they're moving up the value chain into things like dairy products, and there's some more hydroponic greenhouses. I would like to note that they had the second lowest average operating cost nationwide, and 11% of U.S. projects were announced in this region in 2023 and 2024. And then finally, I will bring us to what was the best performing region, which is the South Atlantic. And Savannah, Georgia was the highest quality. Dalton, Georgia was the lowest cost. And you can see that there's everything from animal slaughtering, single serve frozen meals. So that's an example where I don't know why it says animal there. I don't think they're necessarily animal. Apologize for that. Seasoning and dressing, and also another one from Oast House Ventures and seasoning and dressing. And this region was home to 6 of the top 10 metros. So it really overperformed. And ultimately, I would like us to take us to Warner Robins, Georgia, which was the #1 performing location. And before I turn it over to our esteemed guests, I just wanted to show you or kind of give you an idea of where Warner Robins is and give you some perspective on how it sits in the overall economy. So population is just under 200,000. It's made up of 2 counties, Houston and Peach counties. The median age is 37.3, which is a little bit younger than the US average of 38.7. Median household income is also about $5,000 less than the US income. It's about 40% minority, which is a little bit higher than the US income, and 11.2% live below the population. The population live below the poverty line. Robins Air Force Base is a major employer there. It employs about 24,000 people, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about what happens to those people that exit the military every year and are looking for jobs and that make great workforce. And what I'd really like to show you is that, in July 2020, don't just take my word for it that this is a great place for food production, but in July 2020, Frito-Lay, that already has a big operation in Warner Robins, announced an expansion for tortilla chips and baked Cheetos puffs, which is what my kids now eat, of $200 million and an additional 120 new jobs. And if you think that lightning never strikes twice, well, then in April of 2022, Jack Link's announced that it was going to create 800 jobs in Houston County. They call it the Perry Project, with $450 million in investment. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the stars of the show, which are the economic developer from Houston Development Authority, John Hermeier from Jack Link's, and then Tyler Cundiff, who is from Gray, to give us some perspective on both how they made these decisions and what's going on in the food industry right now and how we should think about how to move forward. So with that, Angie, would you please take a second and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Angie Gheesling. As Didi said, Executive Director for the Houston County Development Authority. If you don't know where that's located in Georgia, we're right in the middle of the state. We don't always know where our career paths are taking us as economic developers. Started out in small business and in our family business for over 20 years. Transitioned to economic development and been very fortunate to come with both all state and regional and now local perspective on economic development. And I must tell you, Didi, we're ecstatic with this recognition and the positive spotlight that it's put on our region.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
John, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is John Hermeier, Executive Vice President at Jack Link's. I've been with the company about 24 years, started out as the CFO for my first 12 years, led our international business for about 5 years, and have been in a global leadership position for the last 5 years, working pretty extensively on acquisitions and new projects like the one that we have in Perry, Georgia, that's opened up about 2 months ago now.
Excellent. Thank you. And Tyler.
Yeah, thanks, Didi. My name is Tyler Cundiff. I'm Executive Vice President in our Business Development Group. So I've been at Gray for 28 years now, and for the past about 20 years, I've really been focused on our food and beverage market. And I'm proud to say that today and for the past few years, we've been ranked as the #1 food and beverage contractor in the U.S. and the #3 designer of food and beverage facilities in the U.S. So it's a really big focus for us, and I'm really honored to be here on this webinar with this great team. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your participation. So let's dive right in. So John, I would really like to start with you, and I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your site selection journey. how long it took you, what was the methodology that you applied, and how long did it take?
Yeah. So, coming out of the beginning of COVID, we had a significant increase in our demand for product, realized that we were in the need of building a new facility. And the first thing we realized is that we don't have a lot of experience in site selection. We knew how to add on to facilities, but didn't necessarily know how to go out and find a location to build a new facility. And so the first thing we needed to do is find a good partner. And we went through, I think we interviewed 7 or 8 different potential site selection firms to help us out, and spent the first 2 months evaluating those firms, looking at what the significant factors were. Cultural fit is always number one for us, a good cultural fit with our consultant. Their approach, because we didn't have experience with site selection, we needed to understand what the approach was for the different firms we were interviewing. Kind of their expertise in tax and incentives, because we knew at some point that would become important. The types of analytics they used for analyzing costs and for analyzing labor, and so getting really comfortable with the different firms was most important. We ended up choosing KPMG to represent us, and from there, those first 2 months, it was really hit the ground running, and we started, I think, really looking at the whole United States, and really, I'll say the continental 48 as where we were thinking we could be anywhere. We had a concentration in the upper Midwest. We were, or we still are, a company that's based in Minong, Wisconsin, population 521. And we've got operations, though, that are really peppered throughout the Midwest, but recognize that we could end up going anywhere. So we started out with 48 potential states to choose from. We worked with them to narrow it down to about 29 states, went from 29 states to 18 states, and then down to about 10 states. And we did all of that in just a couple of months. Started out with submissions that went out to 18 different states in order to find out, hey, what types of locations do they have available that we could go look at. We did 37 virtual site tours. Followed that up with about a dozen, or actually 13 actual site tours, where we took a team of 6 or 8 people and went out from location to location to location, meeting the various representatives. Got that narrowed down to about 5 sites that we said, hey, these are the ones that we're going to fully analyze. Narrowed that down to 3. And then I think it was by November of 2021, we had it narrowed down to Perry, Georgia, as being the location that we wanted to locate in.
And what was it that tipped the scale in favor of Perry, Georgia?
So the obviously they had to have the basics in terms of what we were going to be doing, and for analyzing I'll call the most important things. And the most important thing for us, again, was cultural fit. We needed to have a good feel that, hey, these were the type of people that we wanted to work with. We have a history of, once we're in a location, we stay there for a long, long time. We generally don't shut down facilities. And so most important thing was going to be that we really felt comfortable with the people that we were going to be working with. Of course, labor availability is always important. Infrastructure, extremely important. Do we have the sufficient natural gas supplies, water, wastewater, electricity, all those things. So all of those things kind of, I don't know if I want to say they definitely excluded certain locations. But at the end of the day, the deciding factor was really Angie and the collaborative team of people that she put together, or that worked together on our project. And Angie, forgive me if I forget anybody, but it started really with the state of Georgia. So the economic development people in Georgia included the Development Authority of Houston County, which is the organization that Angie represents. Georgia Power, extremely important. That was definitely a player at the table. The Central Georgia Technical College, that Dr. Ivan and his team of people. The city of Perry, Mayor Randall Walker, et cetera. So it was really those 5 groups that I think came together and collaborated and presented themselves really as one community, one sponsor, that it was almost became a no-brainer for us. We felt so comfortable after meeting Angie and the team and the hospitality that they showed. They checked all the boxes that we needed with regards to people and infrastructure. The fact that Warner Robins Air Force Base was nearby, a big factor. We were planning on building a highly automated facility. And we knew that as people were retiring out of that facility, they were going to be looking for full-time jobs. And we thought, what better potential marriage than to be able to bring those people in, work in our maintenance area, work in our engineering area. And so it was really a combination of all those things that came together and led us to the inevitable conclusion that Perry, Georgia was the place we wanted to be. That and they have great pecan pie.
Oh, well, that's a must. And I want to make sure that we take note of that you probably had other locations that were technically feasible. And our job as site selectors, and I'm happy to hear that you did work with the site selector, even though I didn't even know about this project. But and that's all fine. It's a big world, and there's lots of projects and plenty of room for everyone. But I want to emphasize the point that at the end of the day, it's people making the decision. And once you check all the boxes of the must-haves, and it's a competitive place, both from a quality and a cost perspective, it's people making the decision about where do they feel most comfortable with executing a big project like this. Because if you're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars in the ground, you have to feel like you have a partner on the other side.
Yep. Very much agree with that. And that's why the collaboration was so important of those various groups that came together to help support the project. I do want to emphasize that at the end of the day, there was some financial incentive support, and I don't want to underemphasize that, but we were taught early on in the process, an extremely important lesson, and that is that incentives can make a good project better, but they can't make a bad project good. So if you don't have all the other boxes checked, it doesn't matter how much money or how much incentive, et cetera, that the location is providing for you. You got to have all those other boxes checked before you get to the financial incentive piece.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the icing on the cake. So Angie, congratulations. And I don't necessarily mean on being selected as the #1 MSA for food manufacturing, because what really matters is that you won in not just one and not just two, but I mean over some period of time, you've won multiple projects in this sector. The latest one being Jack Link. So, how did Warner Robins and Houston County prepare themselves for this type of project? What did they do so that they put themselves in a position to win?
I think that sometimes we just get really lucky, and sometimes it's evident that there's a perfect match, as John has alluded to, between a community and a company. And John, I appreciate you recognizing the team, because if there's anybody on the call that thinks one person creates all this success, then you've been poorly informed. And as we moved through the process, we discovered, I brought in our former governor, Sonny Perdue, that's from our community, and had him sign the NDA. We all still follow the rules, and he signed the NDA and realized that he had been friends with Jack Link. That is a real person, if people on the call didn't know that, for a number of years. And so I think that we just all knew right away that the culture, and that is important. I'd appreciate John saying that, between the community and the company aligned. It's just important for the community to feel like the company is a good fit, as vice versa, And this project could have been a lot more challenging because most of the process was during COVID. And we were fortunate the company was able to be mobile and flexible. They were able to utilize their personal aircraft and stay away. We were still kind of staying away from commercial airline travel even. And the community in turn had to find ways to adapt to this new way of moving through the recruitment process. And some of it still carries on, like the virtual visits. And I think that's been great for us to all learn that practice. And our first visit took place on the industrial site in the middle of a pecan grove. It was asked that we try to stay away from inside meetings. And so we pulled the TV monitor from my house to show the presentation, and ran 100 feet of extension cords to generators at the end of the pecan grove, and just out of earshot of the presentation. And of of course, when you have Sasquatch to work with, it makes for very easy material. So the whole process, was a lot of fun. And when it comes to industry recruitment, the state of Georgia is a true partner to the communities, and John recognized that right away. And you combine the assets that are available to all of us, and we're able to wow, a company through presentations and access to resources. And in preparing for this type of industry, as has been said, there are large utility requirements and, of course, upfront incentives, that you are going to need to have in place to prepare for, especially a heavy hitter like a Jack Links, to entice them into your community. And really, my advice I know we've got some fellow economic developers on the calls, to understand that your pledge to support the company after the location is equally, if not more, important than what you do during the recruitment. Recruitment's fun and it's challenging, but you find the real work begins after the location. And we built an offering to the company that demonstrated that aftercare was indeed a priority.
Yeah.
And we were able to show that. I think it's great to demonstrate support. You mentioned the expansions that have occurred in the last 9 years at Frito-Lay, but there's also Purdue Farms, and we've supported their expansions. So I think that when you can really talk to a prospective company about, you're important to us, we want you here, but you need to know that our number one priority are our existing industry, and to be able to show that we have gone above and beyond and offer equal incentives when existing industry are locating. So we have the largest Frito-Lay, the largest Purdue Farms location, and now, of course, very happy to report that this is the largest location for Jack Links as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important to know, to be able to have a track record like that really demonstrates. I know you say that you're taking care of your existing customers, and I think for a company like Jack Links or anyone that's considering Warner Robins, that shows how committed you would be to them as well if they were to come to that location.
Exactly.
But no location is perfect, right? There's always going to be issues when you develop a project. You're going to run into hurdles. And so I'd like to ask John just quickly if you can elaborate. I know you said you just opened a couple of weeks ago. So what are some of the challenges that you have faced, and how did the state or the community or those stakeholders that you talked about, how did they come to help you solve those problems?
Yeah, great question, Didi, because I think that we hit a snag right from the start. We had a big lift coming out of COVID. We had grand plans. We went out, we developed all those plans, we presented the plans, we got the plans approved, and then we hit upon a slowdown in our business. And that slowdown resulted in us delaying the project start for about, I want to say, 15 months. I think that we had our groundbreaking was in April 2021, or April 2022, excuse me. But we didn't break ground actually until July of 2023, actual groundbreaking. And so the good thing was, from my perspective, that we stayed partner with Angie and with the state of Georgia all through that 15-month delay. It could have been a case where they would have said, well, geez, in that case, we're going to change the funding, we're going to withdraw from the process, et cetera. But they stayed partnered with us, they stayed patient with us. And that was probably the biggest hurdle that we faced, was that kind of 15-month delay, and what that was going to mean to us from an overall project standpoint, as it related to incentives and as it related to our long-term plans. We did scale the plans back slightly, but for the most part, all the incentives remain relatively the same as they had been from the start.
That's great. Yes. And we saw that a lot with projects. I mean, we were right at the door of announcing a project in Texas when COVID hit, and we were representing another family held company. And they put the brakes on for, about 15 months as well. And so we call it Project Lazarus because it kept coming back from the dead. And ultimately they built that facility in McGregor, Texas, right outside of Waco. It's Cundiff. It was a glass insulation facility. So there were lots of communities and lots of companies that were going through those same struggles at that time, because we just, whether you saw a direct slowdown or not, you really didn't have clarity on where the economy was going. So it was kind of a scary time. So It's great to hear that you all stuck with it and that the community and the state stuck with you as well. I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about some design and construction trends and come to you, Tyler. And I'd just like for you to describe what challenges do you see that food and beverage companies are facing during site selection specifically, and how do you help them overcome them?
Yeah, so like John said, a lot of customers kind of like Jack Links that we're working with quite a bit. Fortunately, we've had the opportunity to work on a lot of, greenfield type food and beverage customers that are looking at multiple different sites across the U.S. And John mentioned, challenges with utility infrastructure, labor availability. There's always food safety to account for, even at the earliest stages. There's community concerns and there's site costs. So really our perspective is more from it's bringing more of a technical perspective to the process, even at its very earliest stages. And so today I'll focus on a couple of those. One being kind of when we step in, there might be 10 or the customer might be down to 10 or 15 sites, or they may be down to 5 sites, or they may be down to the final running between the last 2 finalist sites. And every
Which case
time,
you normally say you should have brought me in earlier.
what's it? Yes.
Sometimes they're not technically the best 2 sites, but yes.
Right. Well, I guess a good thing for us is that in addition to being a builder, we also have a full suite of comprehensive design services. So that's anywhere from civil, structural, architectural, mechanical, and even on the factory side, process and packaging and automation. So when customers need us to help evaluate the cost of different sites, we can really take a comprehensive view of what that is. For instance, there may be 5 finalist sites, and to get them over the hump, the customer may really need to know what the cost differential is between building in one place versus the other. So based on our historical cost and our historical experience, we can very quickly lay the building out on these different sites and kind of do desktop reviews and come up with a pretty quick and accurate assessment of what it's going to cost to go to each different site. So that's usually when it's getting down to the final, I don't know, X amount of sites. Another area where we are helping our customers overcome some challenges is really from the community. Once a food and beverage company may announce the project at a particular site, well, everybody hears about it. And the first things that are going to come up is, well, what's it going to smell like? What's it going to look like? How's it going to impact traffic in our areas? Well, that's where our engineers can come in and really help out with that. So, I love going in a bakery. I love going in a brewery. I love those smells, but some people may not, and it may smell a little bit different when it's coming outside of the factory. So we'll step in and we'll help with different odor mitigation methods and techniques from a design standpoint. I mean, the best way to do that is a clean, or what we call a hygienic facility. Implementing the most stringent sanitary and hygienic design is one of the best ways to mitigate any type of odors. And then you can also do that through your equipment selection, or you can use things like odor stacks that help filter the odors that may come out of the facility. That's one way that we help out. Another one has to do with traffic. We have to do traffic studies, and we'll help our customers really assess where the proper entrances need to be for employees and trucks. And that may not be one option. It may be multiple options, and the effects of that could affect the way the building lays out on the facility. So really helping the customer overcome those challenges. And then I would say the third one, which is kind of neat that we see, is the appearance of the facility. A lot of communities might not necessarily want to see like a corporate, because food and beverage facilities, while they're located in not directly in urban areas, they're pretty close, but they're often out in rural areas as well. So really our architects and designers step in to try to creatively design the facade of the food manufacturing facility in a way that blends in. And we've really found that customers have become more and more interested and different creative design ideas to make their facility look like like if it's in a farm setting, to kind of have a facade that might look more like a barn than a corporate office. So we're seeing that more and more. So those are a few different ways that we're helping our customers overcome their challenges during the early stages of a project when they're really getting down to selecting a site.
Yeah, I have found that when we've worked with Gray on many different projects, it is very valuable to have someone with a design eye and technical, when it comes to civil and structural and designing the access, and to have their input just to help us classify, low cost, high cost, lays out really well. There's lots of issues with it, just so that we can continue to narrow down, and then we put more and more detail around it with Gray's help as we narrow down the list of options. So if you start with 10, it's going to be pretty high level. By the time you get to 2 or 3, you're definitely doing conceptual layouts and doing takeoffs and understanding what the soil conditions are, et cetera. So there's a couple of things that are sort of applicable across different sectors. I'm going to start with labor availability. So that's kind of a recurring theme. And because of both in operating and in construction. And just recently, we saw an operation at the Hyundai plant outside of Savannah. And that underscores how community concerns and federal enforcement can intersect. And Angie, I'm just wondering, obviously the economic developers don't have any purview over this, but Are there ways that you help manufacturers navigate labor shortages regardless of what the cause of them is?
Well, certainly. And I think too, just kind of, we don't have all the facts on what has occurred. And I appreciate you acknowledging kind of who has control, over those situations. And I think, back to we all recognize, not just the level of aftercare that is needed, but there's also now that increased pressure we felt, particularly over the last 10 years, not just to be able to speak to warm bodies that are out there possibly, looking for jobs that are in the 30 or 45 mile radius, but really being able to demonstrate, what that skill set is of those people that are in that area. And I think that, they're back to the aftercare that was part of the package that we really emphasized back to Jack Links. We've made a pledge to work alongside the company for as long as it takes, to bring on those employees. And for us as an MSA and being a regional employer, and you talk back, to Robins Air Force Base, with 24,000 people, they're constantly hiring there, and they're hiring from as many as 70 counties across our state. So it's important that not only the work that I'm doing in Houston County to grow our workforce from K-12 up, but also that any of the curriculum and pathways that we're putting in place are also available in the systems and the technical colleges that are within that 30 and 45 and 60 mile radius. So it's been interesting now, that increased responsibility that has fallen to us as economic developers to make sure that we're constantly attuned to looking out for companies.
I feel like the definition of economic developer has broadened so much that you have to think about, availability of labor and the skills of those labor, but then you also have to think about things like housing and childcare and placemaking. I think placemaking is so important these days. I mean, how many people do you have exiting out of the Air Force Base every year?
So we have 500 to 1,000 people that are exiting, and their average age is 42 years old. I mean, these people are not going, home by any means. They're looking for that next career. And we have a veterans training center called the Vector Center that's one of the kind in the country that can take those folks that are transitioning out, and maybe they want to look to a different career, and help them to go through an accelerated program so that they understand what other high demand career opportunities there are in our industry in the area. And it's just a great feeding pipeline back into our industry. And it's great for me with recruitment. It really resonates.
Yeah,
That we've got
I
access.
find communities that have an Air Force base that do that really well. Sometimes that crosswalk from military jobs to civilian jobs isn't so clear.
That's right.
And collaboration between the local community and the Air Force Base. I know that it's not the only place, but I think you mentioned earlier that that the last 6 months that they're serving, they can actually serve in an apprenticeship type role. Is that correct? And then
Yeah, so
the military.
right. So the opportunity extends outside of our county. So Vector Center is open to anyone enlisted military that kind of their home base is the state of Georgia to come in for this very accelerated program. The program's called Skill Bridge that's available. It takes many different forms, but for us, partnering with our technical college, and there are probably 8 to 10 different areas of focus there that they can do an intensive study. It's great because they're still being paid by because of their military position. There's housing made available to them. Most of that is on our Air Force Base. And then in the last 2 weeks, there is an apprenticeship format where they go in and work with our local companies. And it's an opportunity for them to shadow and be certain that they've chosen the right pathway. But it's also a great opportunity for our folks, our companies, to interview those people. And we're seeing tremendous success where you came here thinking you would go back to your home community, and people are staying and working for our local companies.
Yeah. And I suppose that they could transition into all kinds of different occupations, some of which may be in manufacturing operations, but some of them also might be in construction. So, Tyler, I'd like to ask you, normally we see scrutiny on the employment of people operating in a facility, but this Hyundai thing has sort of caused us to realize that, okay, it's not just inside the facility, it's also when it's being developed. Is this something that concerns you, and what strategies is Gray using to ensure workforce stability in regions with heightened immigration enforcement?
I wouldn't say the situation at Hyundai has caused any direct concern to us. On our construction projects, we're abiding by all regulatory requirements for, we've got to really be diligent with our subcontractor partners, working all over the United States in different areas, a lot of different, thousands of subcontractors that we work with. So over the years, we've really built into our systems and processes to have our subcontractor language to cover those bases. And then we do audits on site to ensure that all of our subcontractors are following the rules. And in addition to that, another strategy that might be tangential, but I think it helps mitigate any risks with the regulatory requirements is that we've really built a self-perform group where we self-perform concrete and steel on our projects, in addition to process equipment and utility and piping installation. So we have large trade labor that are Gray employees working all over the U.S. So that's just another level of our ability to be able to mitigate those risks. And, we certainly ensure that we have the right employees on site and are following the rules. So it's really being diligent with our subcontractors, having great communication with the local community and our customer. And then we've even increased that by having self-perform labor for our construction projects.
Yeah. And I think it's collectively, a problem that an issue that we have to solve, because estimates are that up to 40% of construction labor are immigrants of various levels of documentation. So certainly it's an important part of delivering these projects on schedule and on time. Let's move now to the other big uncertainty right now, which is tariffs. And John, I'd like to hear from you first, because I think you guys had a little bit of a head start and so weren't so impacted by the tariffs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'd say we're all being impacted by the tariffs, to begin with. But, it's something that we deal with. I mean, instead of a movement in commodity prices, instead we're seeing the commodity prices moved by tariffs. But whether it's tariffs, whether it's labor costs, whether it's labor availability, there's always challenges out there. And I think that as I said, we're all feeling the impact of it right now because there's been a significant decline in the beef herds in the United States over the last 20 years. In fact, I think that in 2024 we're at a 73-year low in the herd size of the herd in the U.S. And so there's been a growing dependence on imports from other countries to meet our overall food supply needs. And so the tariffs, hopefully in the long run, will be pushing us to rebuild the herd. It's already started rebuilding a little bit, but we need to hopefully become more dependent on homegrown. But we're a global company. We have a global supply chain. We have plants on 3 different continents in the United States. We have a couple plants in Europe, a plant in Australia, a plant in New Zealand. Each of those plants is serving the market of consumers in those areas. And so for the most part, the raw materials are coming locally that are feeding those plants. Unfortunately, tariffs have a global impact because even though it's a tariff coming on the product coming into the United States, for the most part, commodity prices are globally set. Because if the demand for Brazilian beef declines, then the demand for New Zealand beef increases, and if the demand for U.S. beef increases, then the demand for Brazilian beef or other beef will move in a different direction. So it doesn't take long for global commodity prices to even themselves out, no matter what's going on from a tariff standpoint.
Right, they will find their new level.
Yes, and unfortunately, that level is about 20% higher now than it was a couple of months ago when tariffs got announced.
Yeah, and I think the types of beef that are used to make links is very different from the types of beef that we would normally order in a restaurant. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's something never occurred to me.
Yeah, I'll try not to go too deep with what Jacqueline likes to call kind of beef 101. But yeah, the majority of the U.S. cattle supply is grain fed, and grain fed beef makes great table meat. It makes great steaks. It makes great roast beef. But what it doesn't make is good ground beef, because you need, in order to get like a 90% lean ground beef or an 85% lean ground beef, you need to have lean meat going in. Grain-fed cattle are a fattier cow. And so what the ground beef producers do in the U.S. is they mix the more fatty beef that's grown domestically with lean beef that's coming out of places like New Zealand, Australia, and Brazil. And so the result of that is that there's been a growing demand for meat coming out of those markets. We also use that, what we call 100% visually lean meat, to make beef jerky. And so it's putting a significant amount of pressure on our raw material costs. It's putting a lot of pressure on the ground beef producers' raw material costs. And the unfortunate result of that is we're all going to pay a little bit more for our ground beef and a little bit more for our beef jerky.
Yeah. I've noticed at the grocery store, because usually you think of ground beef as being like, the cheapest meat that you can buy, so that's definitely changed a little bit. This is really for anyone. I mean, what other headwinds are you seeing that are facing the food industry? I mean, there's changing regulatory requirements associated with the MAHA movement. Obviously, you have changing consumer preferences. You've got the GLP-1, which has led to a huge spike in not just exclusively GLP-1, but there has been a big spike in demand for protein. So what challenges or opportunities does that present from your perspective?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I'll be quick. As far as headwinds and then maybe tailwinds as well. With the tariffs, we're not. I guess the number one thing we're seeing as far as a headwind is just the delay in decision making. You know, like your chart showed for 2025, the investment has dropped off. We are certainly seeing that. However, we're seeing retooling, we're seeing brownfield projects, we're seeing expansions. The greenfields have definitely dropped, and I think just uncertainty, fear of the unknown, those could pick back up. Although there has been I would say, a glut of greenfield construction in the food and beverage industry over the past few years. So really the decision-making process, with Maha, we've seen some pretty big announcements from large food and beverage companies related to reformulating, you know, with some of their ingredients and how they're going to process their food. Yet to be seen how that's going to affect them. But I would say if they're doing that, the manufacturing facilities will need some sort of adjustment to be able to handle that. So that could actually be a tailwind. But what we're seeing as a tailwind, kind of where we are now in the future, we are really seeing a large movement of foreign direct investment in the U.S. with Asian food companies, more so than we have ever seen in the past. It's always been a pretty steady diet of that work, but it is grown more now than what I've seen in the past 20 or 30 years. Definitely. And, you know, I think with my colleagues that are based in Tokyo, so a lot of that work is coming from Japan, food and beverage customers. It's really just a long-term plan to invest in the U.S. and just the friendly nature it is here, and they understand the working environment in the U.S., but the product demand is definitely high. So that's a tailwind or a positive thing that we're seeing in the food and beverage industry.
Yeah, I'd say a tailwind for us, or at least we're hopeful it'll become a tailwind, is that we are a great tasting, better for you type snack. We're not very highly processed, and so we're hopeful that you know, the consumer groups will recognize that. More importantly, that the advocacy groups will recognize that. There's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for growth in our category because we're not very processed. But that's all going to come down to communication. We need to make sure that we've got the communication messages out there so that not only do our consumers understand that and pick up a piece of Jack Link's beef jerky or kipper beef steak or one of the sticks coming out of our facility in Perry, but that we also can impress that point upon about the Department of Health and Human Services and the fact that we are a better for you low processed food that is relatively easy to make. It's not highly processed at all. So we're hopeful, but we have to communicate that message. It's not going to just sell itself.
Yes, absolutely.
And I would, Didi, I would echo that of our food and beverage market, the subset, the hottest subsector of that is the protein market. And to really echo what John was saying, I think all those things come into play.
Yeah. I think another potential tailwind that's coming out of, you know, maybe more the aggressive enforcement on immigration is going to be the need to more highly automate. It's going to help out Tyler and his businesses. We built a state-of-the-art, highly automated facility in Perry, Georgia. We need to continue to highly automate our other facilities around the country and around the world because this challenge with labor. As Angie mentioned, it's not something that just goes back, 6 months to the beginning of the more aggressive enforcement. It goes back 10 years, 20 years to an industry that traditionally has been highly labor intensive, and so the need to automate is growing, not diminishing. And so the need for Tyler and companies like his to help out companies like us do that is a tailwind for them, and it's an opportunity for us.
And Angie, I would think that fits into, like, you're definitely a growing community, but you've had a lot of success. And so seeing a operation that's going to come in and spend a lot of capital and create maybe fewer, but high paying, high quality jobs, how does that fit within your overall strategy? And I'll let this be the last word here.
Yeah, I think that's what we all should come to terms with. That is taking when I got into this business 27 years ago. And
we started at exactly the same time.
Yes, I noted that a while ago. And
You're only 10.
Yeah. starts with a little bit of with imbalance there to maybe how we all kind of came into the business. And I was just going to note that automation in the food industry has been very fascinating to watch. That's got to be one of the hardest industries to automate. But they're being forced to look at that. So that's one thing as economic developers, another resource that we're going to need to be attuned to. We're very lucky that, you know, we have access to some great programs in our technical college. It doesn't hurt to have Georgia Tech and their resources that we have.
And Georgia Quick Start is obviously a great asset.
I was going to mention a while ago that as far as winning this project, and a lot of people look at it as one is the same, they're all under the technical college system. But that, you know, having that #1 training program in the state, and they're so adaptable and so agile. I think that, you know, we've just all really got to stay on top of it and make sure we're helping our companies.
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to add, just to finish up, is that if you have programs that highly incentivize jobs over capital investment, you may want to look at retooling that, unless you just happen to have, you be one of the only places that has extra talented, skilled labor just sitting on the sidelines.
Amen.
So with that, we are at the end of our discussion. A huge thank you to our incredible panelists for sharing their time and expertise. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We'll be sending out the recording in the coming days, so keep an eye on your inbox. Feel free to share that with whomever you would like. And if you'd like to have a more personalized conversation about your project or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk. So thank you again. Until next time, take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.